to sort of a global Jewish perspective, is that we have a prayer that we say every day, 3 times a day, which is Techezena Enenu B'Shuvcha L'Tzion B'Rachamim. We talk about our eyes, and you return us to the city, to Zion, in compassion and in kindness. So I think Jerusalem has been at the center and focus of Jewish consciousness from the very beginning, from the story of Abraham, who's we regard as the first Jew, Abraham and Sarah, and Abraham in chapter 12 of Genesis, right in the very beginning, when God's call to Abraham is to leave his land and to go to this place that I will show you. And the place that I will show you is associated in Jewish tradition with Jerusalem. And that is indeed the place where he, according to Jewish tradition, where he takes Isaac on the 3-day long journey, the journey for the sacrifice, which will take place on the stone. And I know it has resonance for Islam. But to the stone, to this place, Hamakom, it is known as the place. In a sense, it is the place to which all roads lead. It was so one of the Jewish philosophers, poets, medieval times, Yehuda Levi, or Judah Levite said, he said my heart is in the east. My body may be here in the west, but my heart is in the east. And that, I think, characterizes so much of Jewish yearning and longing for Jerusalem, which was the center, the place that God had promised, where God reveals himself. So it is the place where God is encountered at his closeness and his most intimate form. And through Abraham and then Isaac and Jacob, Jacob's famous dream is first of all, so where he dreams of the ladder, the angels ascending and descending. It's also that's the focal point where he lies down. It's called that the place again. So it is part of biblical consciousness, and then it becomes part of Jewish consciousness through the ages, and it becomes the place that people would make a pilgrimage to. Even in temple times, they would make a pilgrimage with their fruits and vegetables and the very ordinary kind of things which were connected and associated with it. And in later times came the idea that if you could try and get to Jerusalem, but or be connected to Jerusalem, you want prayers and thoughts when the temple, and so that is also because the temple, which is is built there. The first temple is built there during it's destroyed by the Babylonians, and then it begins to be rebuilt in Persian times, Greek, Roman. So it is built by King Solomon, which is very, very early. That King Solomon built a very smaller version of the way the temple was, the second temple was. He built this small one, and he has, there's this conversation. King David is the one who wants to build the temple. David, the first famous king of Israel. He's not the first king. Remember, Saul is the first king, but David then becomes the king who unifies the people, who also makes Jerusalem into part of his capital, even though he's not born there. He comes from Hebron and born in Bethlehem. So King David wants to build the temple in Jerusalem, but he has blood on his hands. If you remember, God says that you may be he is a great poet, but as a warrior with blood on his hands, God says not appropriate that you should build the city of peace. So his son Solomon gets to build it, somewhat controversially as well, because it becomes a mammoth task, and Solomon starts imposing taxes on the people and sending them off to almost like forced labor in order to get from Lebanon, to bring cedars from Lebanon, and etc. So Solomon builds the first temple, which is then destroyed in the year 586, is it? BC?
Somewhere around there.
I think it's 586 by the Babylonians, the very first temple, and that because what's called in the Jewish exile. So they have been there. So the time that the Jews actually had their sovereignty and lived in the land of Israel, they've lived far more outside of the land of Israel than in the land of Israel, and far more outside of a sovereign, independent Israel than an independent sovereign state, etc. So it had its brief periods during obviously King David, Solomon, when it is united, which is I think, and then there is the breakdown. The first temple is destroyed, and then I'm really skipping over some few thousand years of history. So we get to the time it begins to be rebuilt with Ezra and Nehemiah, who are the prophets who return there, and under King Darius of Persia, who gives permission and is behind the project. So begins to be rebuilt, and it's ultimately though rebuilt into its final form by a man of complex as the city, complicated, conflicted, and controversial as the city of Jerusalem itself, a man called Herod. And we will see Herod's influence everywhere. The man had a great edifice complex. Right? He built there from Caesarea, where he built his hippodromes, to Herodian, on top, which is outside of Jerusalem, this magnificent palace, Masada, which we're hopefully going to get to, which was another one of his palaces, Summer Palace, which is near the Dead Sea with a wonderful view. And
maybe the ancient Trump.
And yes. He was something of a, very, but he built this beautiful, and what remains today of the Second Temple is what we will see. But we will see some of the remains controversially as well of what is supposed to be King David, the city of David. We'll go there, which is now outside the actual walls of today's walls, because they say the walls that had been of a different size. And then, but Herod rebuilds it twice the size of King Solomon's, twice, and more ornate in marble and all the rest of it. And it stands there till the year 70, when it is sacked, burnt by the Romans. And the Romans want to burn it to the ground, and they want to plow it into the ground and to remove they try to remove the name Jerusalem as well. And that's where Palestine, the name, comes from. That the Romans were to change it completely. And then, but then, despite that, so for thousands of years, there was always, we believe, been a Jewish presence there, but very small, very tiny at times. And then, of course, till the year 1948, when the State of Israel is declared by the United Nations, and Jews have been returning there for hundreds of years before that, whenever they could, but certainly from their start, what's called a great return to the land in the 1800s, the first Aliyot there. And then in Jerusalem, then till 1967, though Jerusalem is in the hands of the Jordanians. The old city, the actual old city, and the wall and the temple, etc., is in the hand. There is restricted. The Jordanians restrict access to it, to the Western Wall for the Jews. Only very few can come. It's a very narrow, tiny little place, and they're not. And then during British mandate, they're with all other kind of bans, and they're not allowed to blow the shofar there, etc. 1967, the Six-Day War. In the war, Jerusalem is won or captured or occupied, whichever language you wish to use, by the Israelis, who then reunite, which is the language seen from a Jewish perspective, reunite the two parts of Jerusalem. The modern part, which was there was just a wire fence and a no man's land between the old city and the new city of Jerusalem. And so they are brought together again. And that is from one of Jewish significance, it's seen as, was something as many seen as was heralding Messianic time, and there was great euphoria.
The date of that is a week after our program.
6th of June.
6th of June.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. So we missed what's called Jerusalem Day by about a week. Just from a personal perspective, I think it's a place that I've spent. I've been there many times. I spent a year living in Jerusalem as a student. When I was studying in yeshiva, studying part of my religious study, and so I lived there for a year. First time I went there was on a 3-month program, which a lot of young Jewish people do when they finish like their VC, they OE, they go the gap year. A lot of them will do that now. So I did that I've done that experience, and then I've been back in each of my children has spent almost a year in Jerusalem. I've been there with each of them in different ways, and have taken. Last year was the first group that actually led to Jerusalem, when I led a group of Christian ministers, which I'm going to be doing the week before our meet up with us. I'm doing another group. I'm going next week. So this, as we said, saying next week in Jerusalem. And one of the things I'll just share with you is that over the years, I dabble in a bit of poetry. And so I've written poems virtually every time I go to Jerusalem. It stirs some poetry in me. Now, I'll read you one of the early one, and maybe at some other point, maybe when we're in Jerusalem, I'll read you a later one. And this is the one I wrote when I was a student, when I came back, I think only a second or third time. And it said, I've come back to the city, uncovered only stones, cold and white in the sharp of dawn. I've come back to you, only the snarl of lips caught in prayer, the gnarl of an ancient debate. I will not dig under the walls, too many broken pasts, too many cracked cells. I cannot hope to catch that dark dream sailing swiftly beneath them. But I will walk these walls naked tonight, and in the still and seeping city catch a glimpse of Jacob bursting from his rocky pillow to plough the night with stars. So that's part of my Jerusalem. Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. According to Wikipedia, if that's a good source.
Yeah.